It was supposed to be a simple drive. No flashing lights, no security escort, just Major General Denise Wallace, behind the wheel of a rental car, headed toward a confidential meeting at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. A seasoned leader with nearly 3 decades of service to her country, Denise had taken drives like this 100 times before, but just outside the small town of Brookvale, everything changed. Her secure military phone lost signal, and she pulled into an aging gas station, Miller's Fuel and Mart, to place a vital call to the Pentagon. What followed wasn't a routine stop, but a disturbing display of prejudice that would trigger a nationwide reckoning. Dressed in simple jeans, a windbreaker, and a baseball cap, Denise didn't look like a decorated officer, just another black woman minding her business. But to Paula Green, the station clerk, with a habit of seeing threats where there were none, Denise was suspicious. One quiet phone call later, 2 local officers, Sergeant Cole Travis and Officer Mark Delroy, arrived and escalated the situation within minutes. They ignored her military credentials, refused to believe her rank, and publicly handcuffed her without cause. They didn't know who she was. Worse, they didn't care. But they were about to learn the hard way. What happens when you treat a United States Army general like a criminal because Denise Wallace made a call that would turn the entire country's eyes toward Brookvale? It all started with a wrong assumption, and 2 officers who didn't care enough to ask the right questions. Major General Denise Wallace had served her country for nearly 30 years. She'd led troops in foreign lands, advised high-ranking officials in Washington, and carried the weight of duty with quiet, unwavering pride. That Tuesday morning, she wasn't wearing her uniform. Just a ball cap, an olive jacket, jeans, and running shoes. Nothing to suggest she held one of the highest ranks in the U.S. Army. And that, in the eyes of the wrong people, was enough to get her handcuffed. Denise was driving through Brookvale, a small Louisiana town most people wouldn't remember on a map, on her way to a confidential briefing at Barksdale Air Force Base. When her secure military phone lost signal, she pulled into a worn-down gas station called Miller's Fuel and Mart to complete the call. It was standard protocol. Nothing unusual until Paula Green, the store clerk, saw a black woman outside, speaking into a device she didn't recognize. Suspicious, unfamiliar, unwelcome. Without hesitation, Paula called the police to report what she described as strange behavior. She never considered that the woman in front of her might be on official government business. Within minutes, Sergeant Cole Travis and Officer Mark Delroy arrived at the station. Denise barely had time to identify herself before the accusations began. They questioned her presence, ignored her military ID, and dismissed her travel orders. "This is fake," one officer said, tossing her government-issued identification onto the car hood like it was worthless. And when Denise calmly explained that she was a general on official duty, they laughed. The most chilling part? She wasn't resisting. She didn't raise her voice or act aggressively. She followed their instructions, kept her hands visible, and tried to de-escalate. But it didn't matter. They had already decided who she was. A black woman alone in a parking lot, out of place. That was enough for them. They cuffed her like a criminal, shoved her against her car, and ignored the Pentagon official still on the other end of the dropped phone line, shouting her name. People watched. Some recorded. No one stepped in. As Denise sat on the curb, wrists bruised, she didn't yell or cry. She just stared at the men who had decided that her appearance mattered more than her credentials. What those officers didn't know was that her identity had already been verified by the Pentagon, and now the military was mobilizing. Within minutes, a convoy of black SUVs from Barksdale tore into the lot. It was too late for apologies, too late for excuses, because in that moment the story stopped being about just Denise Wallace. It became a symbol of something bigger, something broken, and the start of a reckoning long overdue. The phone never should have hit the pavement, But when General Denise Wallace was shoved against her rental car and handcuffed like a common criminal, her secure military line still connected to a classified Pentagon briefing slipped from the hood and fell to the ground, shattering not only the screen but also the illusion that this was just another routine stop. Back in Washington, the command center at the Pentagon was already on edge. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Grant, seated behind a wall of surveillance monitors, had been listening to General Wallace's voice, just moments earlier crisp and professional, as she reported on an ongoing classified operation. Then suddenly, static, background noise, a scuffle, voices raised. Then nothing. Silence. Grant immediately escalated the alert. "We've lost secure contact with General Wallace," he reported. Colonel Ellen Raines, head of operations, that morning didn't hesitate. "Ping her location," she ordered. Within seconds, a digital dot lit up on the map, far from any known rendezvous point, not even close to the Air Force Base where she was due for a high-security briefing. She was parked at a gas station in the middle of Brookvale, Louisiana, a place most Pentagon personnel had never even heard of. But someone at the Pentagon had. And when the flag on her ID came back federal priority, the protocol was clear: mobilize immediately. 40 minutes later, in Brookvale, the temperature had risen, both in degrees and in tension. General Wallace, still seated against the side of the gas station, didn't move. Her wrists were raw from the cuffs. Her voice stayed low, steady. "You're going to regret this," she said to the officers Sergeant Travis and Officer Delroy, but not as a threat, as a promise. And then came the sound of engines, not from down the street, but from above and all around. A convoy of black SUVs, government-issued and roaring with purpose, flew into the gas station parking lot, tires screeching on cracked asphalt. They didn't pause to assess. They didn't ask for clarification. They knew exactly who they were there for and who they weren't. Leading the charge was Lieutenant Colonel Darius Cole, sharp-eyed and stone-faced. "General Wallace?" "Are you injured?" he asked, his voice carrying across the stunned crowd. "Minor abrasions," she replied evenly. The greater damage was to their judgment. The soldiers quickly surrounded her, shielding her from the stunned local officers. No weapons drawn, no shouting. Just a calm, practiced professionalism that made it clear this was no misunderstanding. This was a federal matter now. Colonel Cole turned to Travis and Delroy, his tone unwavering. "You are hereby ordered to stand down pending federal investigation. Any further action will be considered obstruction." The officers stumbled over half-hearted explanations. "We didn't know who she was." She looked suspicious, but none of it mattered. They had seen a black woman and made a snap decision. Now they were facing the weight of the very system they thought they represented. As the Air Force convoy pulled away, Denise Wallace didn't look back at the town that tried to diminish her. She looked forward toward justice, toward accountability, and toward a nation that was finally being forced to reckon with what it chooses to see and what it too often refuses to. By the time General Denise Wallace arrived back at Barksdale Air Force Base that evening, the damage had already been done. Not to her, but to the two officers who thought they could get away with humiliating a decorated war hero simply because they didn't recognize her authority. Or worse, didn't believe someone who looked like her could possibly hold it. While Wallace sat down for a debriefing, raw footage from a bystander's cell phone had already been posted online. The video showed everything: how she calmly identified herself, how she offered her military credentials, and how the officers ignored her every word before slamming her in cuffs and tossing her ID onto the car like garbage. It took less than an hour for the clip to start making waves. By morning, it had gone viral. Major news networks picked it up: CNN, MSNBC, even veteran-focused publications that rarely took political positions issued powerful editorials. The headlines were direct and damning: U.S. Army general handcuffed by local cops because they didn't believe a black woman could be a general. Civil rights leaders from across the country weighed in. Organizations like the NAACP and the American Legion issued joint statements calling for accountability and systemic reform. Social media turned Brookvale, Louisiana, a place barely known outside the state, into a symbol of everything wrong with how authority, race, and respect so often intersect in America. What started as a quiet injustice in a dusty parking lot had now become a full-blown national reckoning. And the questions were unrelenting. Why didn't the officers recognize clearly valid military identification? Would they have done the same to a white man in uniform? How many other incidents like this have gone unrecorded? Under public pressure, the Mosswood Police Department scrambled to respond. Police Chief Gerald Tate, visibly uncomfortable, held a hasty press conference. "We regret the misunderstanding," he stammered. But when a young journalist asked whether race played a role in the incident, Tate's face turned red, and he had no answer. The damage was done. Worse for the department, anonymous sources began leaking. Officers Travis and Delroy, the ones who arrested Wallace, weren't first-time offenders. Internal records revealed prior complaints for racial profiling, use of excessive force, and unprofessional conduct. All had been quietly dismissed in the past. Not this time. Civil rights attorneys filed federal complaints. The Department of Justice launched a full investigation. Even the governor of Louisiana publicly condemned the incident, calling it a national embarrassment and an insult to the service of every veteran. And through it all, General Wallace remained composed. She declined interviews. She didn't issue a statement right away. Instead, she listened to her advisors, to her conscience, and to the thousands of messages pouring in from veteran students and ordinary citizens who had seen in her story a reflection of their own pain and dignity. For many, Wallace had become a symbol, not of victimhood, but of quiet, powerful resistance. A reminder that even in a country that still struggles with prejudice, strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply stands tall in uniform, speaks the truth, and refuses to look away. Under the blazing Louisiana sun, with rows of cameras pointing toward her and an expectant silence gripping the crowd, General Denise Wallace stood tall in her full dress uniform, her ribbons catching the light like silent witnesses to decades of sacrifice. Just 24 hours earlier, she had been handcuffed in a gas station parking lot by two officers who saw her skin color before they saw her credentials. But today, she wasn't there to relive humiliation. She was there to lead. Behind her stood Air Force officials, her legal counsel, and a crowd of supporters from nearby communities, veterans, students, church leaders, and everyday Americans who had watched the video and seen something all too familiar. Many held handmade signs, a few wiped their eyes, but all were there to hear her speak. She didn't start with anger. She didn't begin with blame. She began with truth. "My name is General Denise Wallace," she said, her voice cutting clean through the hot, humid air. "I've served this country for 29 years. I've led troops into battle. I've advised presidents. I've sworn to uphold the Constitution. But yesterday in a parking lot off Highway 171, none of that mattered." She paused, letting the words land like distant thunder. "I was judged not by my record, not by the uniform I've earned, but by the color of my skin and the assumptions that came with it." The silence in the crowd deepened, broken only by the scratching of pens and the click of camera shutters. "I didn't come here today to demand an apology," she continued. "I came here to say that silence is not an option, that dignity is not negotiable, and that responsibility doesn't end at a badge or a uniform. It begins there." She spoke not only for herself, but for every Black veteran who had ever been questioned instead of thanked. For every woman whose authority was doubted because she didn't look the part. For every citizen who had been told explicitly or implicitly that they didn't belong in their own country. She didn't shout. She didn't weep. Her words carried weight because they didn't plead, they declared. "Injustice is not new," she said, "but change only happens when enough people refused to look away. As she stepped back from the podium, the crowd erupted, not with polite applause, but with heartfelt clapping that rippled outward like a wave. Some people stood. Others raised their fists in quiet solidarity. No one remained unmoved. For General Wallace, it wasn't about revenge. It was about setting a standard. In that moment, she wasn't just a military leader, she was a national conscience. A steady voice reminding the country of what it claims to stand for. Her speech was broadcast on every major network. Snippets were replayed on talk shows and stitched into viral videos online. Overnight, Wallace became more than a trending story. She became a symbol of integrity, courage, and what leadership looks like when it refuses to be silent in the face of wrong. In a time marked by division and distrust, her voice reminded America of what it means to stand for something greater than yourself and to do so with dignity, even when your dignity has been denied. In a country that often forgets those who fought its hardest battles, General Denise Wallace's story served as a thunderclap across the nation's conscience. A decorated officer with nearly 3 decades of military service, she was handcuffed, humiliated, and nearly arrested. Not because she broke the law, but because 2 small-town officers refused to see past her skin color and civilian clothes. They didn't see a leader. They saw a suspicious black woman. And that moment, caught on cell phone footage and shared across every screen in America, changed everything. General Wallace didn't raise her voice. She didn't beg. She didn't run. She did what great leaders do. She stood tall, demanded dignity, and made one phone call that triggered a chain reaction reaching all the way to Washington, D.C. But perhaps the most powerful part of her story isn't the federal investigation that followed, or the press conferences, or even the national headlines. No, the most powerful part is the quiet shift it caused in everyday Americans who saw themselves in her, especially those who have carried their own dignity in silence for years. Veteran seniors, Black Americans, women who've been doubted, and patriots who've been overlooked. Her courage reminded us that true leadership has nothing to do with rank or uniform. It's about standing your ground when it matters most. In living rooms across the country, older Americans leaned forward in their chairs. They remembered the marches, the segregation signs, the sideways glances they endured for daring to sit where they shouldn't. And now, decades later, they saw a reflection of those same struggles play out in a dusty gas station in Louisiana. But this time, the world was watching. General Wallace didn't ask for this moment, but she rose to meet it. And through her voice, many others found theirs. Never underestimate the quiet strength of those who have endured. Respect, dignity, and justice should not be reserved for the privileged or the powerful. They belong to every person who wakes up each morning and chooses to live with honor, even when the world refuses to see them. No matter your age, your past, or where you come from, you matter. And sometimes the most powerful change doesn't come from yelling. It comes from standing firm and saying enough. If this story touched your heart, we want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated or treated unfairly? How did you handle it? Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, true stories that uplift, challenge, and remind us of the strength we carry, especially in our golden years. Tap the bell so you never miss a message that might just change your day or your perspective, because respect shouldn't be optional, and your story deserves to be heard.